Hello everyone and welcome back. So in a previous video, I asked you what kind of video would you like to see as a celebration for 1000 subscribers. Some of you chose a Q&A and some of you a longer compilation. So I decided to do both and I'm planning to upload a Q&A soon. So if you have any questions, any at all, that you would like me to answer, leave me a comment below in the comment section. But for now guys, I think it is time to grab your flashlight, because you are about to step into the darkness. Number 1. A couple of years ago, my brother bought a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 miles or so from cell phone reception. It's quiet, there is no light pollution, no paved roads, and not a lot of people around. Shortly after he bought the place, two of my brothers, the landowner and another, me and our families, spent a weekend camping on the land and doing our best to clean it up. People had used it as a dump. There were many downed trees. On the second night we camped there, I woke up in the middle of the night to take a leak. As I was walking to the bushes in the dark, I realized that I could faintly hear music. This didn't strike me as odd, because I knew my brother had a radio in his camper. I finished up and went back to sleep with no further thought on the matter. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the radio and music. Several other people recalled walking in the night and hearing music, but no two people heard the same music. Finally, the brother who brought the radio woke up. I asked him about the music and he seemed a bit freaked out. He woke up sometime during the night and went outside to smoke. He heard music as well and had assumed it was someone else. I should mention that he was the only one with a generator and a radio. It wasn't his radio we heard. It wasn't anyone else's either. I've been back several times, but I'm a bit freaked out by that place at night. I have fun while I'm there, but I'm almost always armed, and I don't sleep in a tent anymore. I sleep in my SUV with the doors locked. It may seem kinda dumb, but realizing that everyone heard different music when there are no people, no functional radios, and no electricity, it's quite creepy. Number 2. Finally something I can talk about. When I was younger, probably like 10 or 11, I went camping with my family. I'll just get right into it. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning and I couldn't really sleep. The tent me and my brother were, it was really hot and very uncomfortable. Anyway, while I was trying to go to bed, I heard a very faint whimper. I tried to ignore it because I figured I was just tired. Our campsite was along a road with many other camps nearby. The whimper started to get louder and then turned into crying. I heard footsteps outside of our tent and a girl crying her eyes out. Now, let me tell you, it didn't go faint, it got louder and louder. It remained in the same spot the entire time. That's so important because it indicates that she was looking out our tent site, fucking crying. It gets worse. Then it turned into a full-on scream for a few seconds, then cuts out. When she started screaming, my brother woke up. We both look at each other and just get all the pillows and stuff our head under them. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I'm just glad we left the next morning. Number 3. Few years ago, I was camping in the Everglades in Florida with a few friends. We all had gone into our separate tents and were starting to fall asleep. The area was pretty noisy with bugs, crickets, and birds. I heard this very low vibration, sounding almost like a low roar. It was powerful enough to vibrate in my chest. Suddenly, everything in the forest shut up. No bugs, no birds, nothing. About 30 seconds later, my phone vibrates and it's my friend in the other tent texting me, asking if I heard the same thing. The 4 of us kept texting each other, wondering what it was. About 10 minutes later, all the animals slowly started making noise again. I slept that night with my machete at arm's reach. A lot of people are saying it might have been a gator. We were in an elevated area that was far from any streams or ponds. It's possible there might have been a pond with a gator that we missed, but the very big ones tend to hang out in lakes. Number 4. Not necessarily camping, but in 1999, I was with some friends hunting deer in Wisconsin. I had just seen the Blair Witch Project a few weeks earlier. We each headed to our stands in pitch dark about 5:30 a.m. The woods were dead calm. No wind, no moon, and a light snow had fallen the night before. I mean, it was pitch black. I walked alone in the dark, and when I got to about 20 yards from my stand, a deafening scream shattered the silence. Not just once, but it kept going. It sent shivers down my spine, and I almost shit myself. It sounded like a cross between a baby crying and someone slowly killing a poodle, and the screaming went on for what seemed like 15 minutes. I scrambled up the ladder to my stand and quickly loaded my gun. Finally, it stopped. I didn't get down all day. Number 5. One night, I'm sitting in bed, scrolling through Reddit or something, and I start hearing my daughter babbling to herself on her baby monitor. Now, it's really late, like 1 or 2 in the morning, so I turned the picture on the monitor and see her standing up in her crib, facing sort of diagonally away from the camera. I can see her hands in front of her, but only like half of her face. I can see her singing things like nice and silly and fun and oddly enough, no, don't like and bear. Of course, being the good and loving mother I am, and really not wanting to deal with an overly sleepy baby in the morning, I get up to see what the heck she is doing. When I get to her room, she is still standing up and singing, babbling, towards the far corner of her room. I ask her what she is doing and who she is talking to, and she sings, as best as she can, friend, which she does with her whole hands and not just her index fingers, and sings bear again. I tell her that no, Sea Bear, who is actually one of her stuffed toys, is in bed behind her, not in the corner of the room, but she just giggles at me and says, "Silly," and "Mommy." I finally get fed up and asked her who Friend Bear is, and her response literally gave me chills because she doesn't speak well yet, but she managed to say very clearly and with the most serious face a 20-month-old can pull off, "No name, no name, shh." Well, now I'm well and truly freaked out, so I tell her to ask No Name Friend Bear to go home because it is too late to play, and I did what any good loving mother would do. I gave her a pacifier, went back to my room, turned off the monitor entirely, and hid under the covers in my room, where my good and loving husband would protect me from nameless invisible bears. Number 6. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we got in a pretty bad fight about something stupid, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So this afternoon, I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he'd surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed, and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working. But I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight, and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed it was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight and didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened, just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting for 24 hours, huh?" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom, his sister, the landlady? For some reason, I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister. So I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume, Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There is a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood in the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up, and I asked him if his mom or sister might come over unannounced. He told me no, don't move, I'm calling the police. The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird though. Nothing was missing from the apartment, despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. Then a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, I have to tell you something, but don't freak out. He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. It's been 6 months and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment but doesn't touch or take anything valuable, not even the money jar sitting right in the entrance. Takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and immediately leaves. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day. I hope I never do. Number 7. This happened a few days ago, and I'm still pretty shaken about it. I only just thought to post it here, so here goes. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah, asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts, as we hadn't seen one another in a while. Dunkin' Donuts is a 15-minute walk from my house, so I decided I would walk. Besides, the weather was fine. I got to Dunkin' Donuts and found where Sarah and Lisa were sat, so I went to join them. As we were chatting, I noticed that my sister Elena was sat at a table in the corner of the room with her friend Jess. For some context, my sister and her friend are both 18 years old. My sister still lives with my parents and I live alone. I excused myself from the table and went over to Elena and Jess' table. They were sat at a table with 3 seats, so I went to sit down and said hey. They both jumped a little bit, but then looked more relieved than anything to see me. Immediately Elena whispered to me, "Don't look now, but this guy in the blue shirt, I think he's been following Jess and I." I glanced over and I saw the middle-aged man sat at a table facing away from us. He's passed our table a good 5 times in the past 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he walks slower as he passes us. She continued. I told them that they were most likely being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about, but for their peace of mind, I offered to live with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off and assumed my sister to be paranoid. Literally about a minute later, I saw the man get up from his seat and walk towards the bathroom. My eyes followed him, and sure enough, he walked extremely slow past Elena and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obviously slow he became. Both Elena and Jess looked in my direction, and I nodded to show that I had seen him walk slower. About 5 minutes later, I went into the toilets. On my way, I passed Elena and Jess and told them I was ready to leave whenever they were. They both agreed that they were ready to leave now. I told them that I was just going to the bathroom and that we could leave after I had done my business. Elena had come in the car, so she was going to give me a lift back. I went into the toilet stall, did say business, washed my hands. I was walking down the corridor back into the main eating area when Elena and Jess rushed into the corridor. I asked them what's up, and they explained that another man had joined the strange creeper man and that the men were both pointing and staring at them, so they rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back into the eating area. I put my money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off, and I would explain what was going on when I got home. We all got into Elena's car and left the creeps in the car's rear view mirror. After a 2-minute drive, we reached my house. Just then, I had remembered that I had been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mother, so I asked if Elena could drive me to my parents' house, as she was going there anyway. I jumped out the car to get what I needed when my phone rang. It was Elena. She explained that a car had driven past and had pulled into a driveway. She said the driver of the vehicle was the creep from Dunkin' Donuts. I looked out of my window, and sure enough, there was a car, which didn't belong to the owner of the house, parked on their driveway. I got the girls into my house and locked the door. I instructed Elena to take a photo of the car and its license plate, and I told Jess to call 911. I should give the operator more information than what I could. Elena took the photos, and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had finished telling the story, and I heard the operator assure us that the police would be at my house soon. A few minutes passed, and there was a loud knock on the front door, followed by a loud voice shouting, "It's the police!" We all did a sigh of relief as I went to open the door. Jess told the operator that the police were here, and she hung up. I was in the process of unlocking the door when I thought to look through the spy hole at the top of the door. I peered through, and it wasn't a police officer. It was the same guy. I froze in fear, and I didn't know what to say. "We didn't call the police," I managed to shout back to the man through the door. "We had a call, sir," the man shouted back. "You have the wrong address." I yelled back and informed the girls that it was the creep at the door and not a police officer. Both were rightfully shocked and extremely scared, as was I. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again until I heard the sirens. "Sir, you have to let me in," the man shouted again. This time I didn't answer. He was pounding on the door. His commands for me to let him in turned into begging and pleading. I heard the police car pull up and some commotion outside. An actual police officer knocked on the door and I let him in. Yes, I checked the spy hole first. The police officers took the man into custody, while another police officer took Elena and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents and Jess called hers. Both were here extremely quickly once we told them what happened. The man was found with a kitchen knife on his person and some other weapons in his car. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't looked through the spy hole first. Both my sister and her friend are fine, just shaken up after the whole incident. So, guy who stalked my sister and her friend? Let's not meet. Number 8. I was 12 years old, and we were 3 kids sharing 2 bedrooms. So my dad decided to put up a half wall to make a third. If I stood on my bed, I could see into my brother's room. We were young and used to throw a ball over before falling asleep. One night, I was just drifting off when my mom taps me on my shoulder and says, "Psst, what are you doing?" I thought, that's a weird question. Obviously I'm sleeping. So I turn around to answer her. Only it's not my mom. It's not a person. It looked like a 3D shadow of a man. Just black. I screamed while my eyes were closed. The figure disappeared. My mom and dad came running into my room. I tell them everything. They think it's just my imagination. But tell me to go to sleep in the room with my brother. I tried to sleep, but I was shook. My brother woke up once to go use the bathroom upstairs, and I pretended I was asleep. I didn't want him to know I was still afraid. I hear him go into my room, right next door, climb on the bed, and then just stopped. I thought he was trying to purposefully scare me, so I look up to show him I'm awake, and see the figure again, arms crossed with its head resting on his hands. Even though it had no facial features whatsoever, I knew it was looking at me. I tried to convince myself it's dark, it's my brother playing a prank and I'm seeing things. Then I heard the toilet flush upstairs. It was just that one night. I never saw anything like it again, or even close. But years later, in my 20s, I was living alone and felt a tap on my shoulder. "Psst, what are you doing?" I'll stop there, 'cause you'll think I'm crazy. But that was the last time I heard it, and I'm 31 now. It's not a ghost story. I will remember that day until I die. Number 9. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and white, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words. So I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her, and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max, Max, Max. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It wasn't easy. But I just said, sure, and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Among all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on the light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she has sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond and I never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. Number 10. When I was about 13, my parents and I moved to an old house. It was at least 19 years old. It was large and it was in pretty good condition for a house that old. I was an only child. I got the second biggest room on the second floor, and that room was huge. Sometimes my parents left me at home by myself for a few hours. I was always asked to stay at home. I didn't mind staying at home because I like to think of myself as responsible and trustworthy. It made me feel special. One night, at around 6 p.m. or so, my parents had to go run some errands. They were the kind of people who spent long hours out shopping for the best deals, and they used a lot of coupons on whatever they could. And I did not want to be involved in this at all, so I decided not to come. I stayed in my room and watched some TV. Then, at around 8 p.m., I got hungry and decided to get a snack. Now, at this point the house is very dark, so I grab my cell phone and use it as best as I can to light up the hallway, since the hallway didn't have a light. Now, this is before cell phones had built-in flashlights, so I just used all the light my screen could give until I made it to the kitchen. The kitchen light had been left on by my parents. I put my phone on the counter. As I was walking to the pantry, I saw a man hunched down in the corner by the back door. He was wearing black and red clothing, and he had long, greasy, unkempt hair. I didn't see his face. He was holding a large knife. He didn't notice that I had spotted him. I wanted to scream, but I used my hand to cover my mouth and walked back upstairs, leaving my cell phone down there. I was not walking over to get it. We didn't have any phones upstairs, so I walked into my room, locked the door, and I hid in my closet. I start crying silently and start thinking the worst. He was going to find me and kill me. I just knew it. Then I heard someone coming up the stairs. Heavy footsteps. I felt sick and I had never been so afraid in my life. Then I heard someone open the door to my parents' room, which was 2 rooms away from mine. I then hear police sirens outside, and I hear the door being knocked on. I breathe a sigh of relief. I hear the man running back down the stairs quickly, and he's trying to open our back door. Then I hear our front door being pushed down, and I heard footsteps of 2 people coming upstairs, and they start searching our home. The police come to my room and let me know it's safe. I opened the door. I later found out that our neighbors saw this man unlocking our back door with a key and saw that he had a knife and called the police. My parents arrived a few minutes later, and my mom started hugging me and crying. The man unfortunately escaped. I cried and cried, and I got no sleep that night. Because the man had a key, we changed the lock, but we eventually moved way out of state. I'm 23 now. I have moved past it, but there are several questions I still have. How did he get a key? Why did he want to come to our house? And what would he have done if the police showed up any later? Number 11. Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in some nature preserve in Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name. It was pretty primitive camping, no cell service, and we saw 2 other people there in the entire place. It was huge, so it was pretty empty. My boyfriend pretty much immediately said these 2 people seemed off to him right away. I don't know if they had anything to do with what happened that night. The next person we saw drove by several times while we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice though until my boyfriend pointed out that he'd already done that twice. Whether these 2 people had anything sinister going on or not, the real story has to do with what woke us up at around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I could not describe it or even compare it to anything. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little window of the tent. The sound happened again, and again, and it was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to piss myself, but my boyfriend told me it was probably miles off. I didn't question this because loud noises can be heard from miles off, right? Well, later my boyfriend told me. He told me that because he didn't want to scare me. It really sounded like it was coming from right down the little dirt road. At one point, he said he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get out and dart for the car was because he was afraid it could be someone trying to scare us out of the tent for some dreadful reason. He whispered. I should have noticed he was whispering and knew something was wrong, since otherwise he'd just speak normally, right? For me to just go back to sleep. However, I could not, because every little sound I heard outside sounded like someone sneaking up to the tent. Eventually, my boyfriend told me to get out and help him pack up. It was maybe 20 minutes after the sound stopped. He held our only weapon, a machete, in front of him. It was a full moon, or close to it, so we didn't need a light. While we were packing quickly, I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. It wasn't there when we went to sleep at around 10 p.m., and neither of us even brought any beer. Thankfully, we got out of there, and for the rest of that trip, we either camped in areas well populated by other campers, or we got to a hotel room. So, whoever or whatever was, let's never meet. Number 12. I will start out by saying that I am not a writer by any means. I suck at it, but I will try my best. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and the back door to the house and they never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you would know why the house wasn't locked and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother around 10. I was a really smart girl at this age, and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very, very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar as usual. When you opened my front door, it will put you in the living room, and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom, with the door closed, playing something on a PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m., and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it, and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to go get a drink and told him to stay in the room and I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway in front of both the front and back door because it was behind the living room. I kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our Ford so that it would be ready and I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get to my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Good going, Mom. I knew if he started having an asthma attack, on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyway, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on. Because I was such a badass at 12 years old, but I had to protect my little brother, I started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I hear a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. I can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So, I of course freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state. My mom is at the bar drunk as hell. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I hear my brother's door open. He sees me, and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motion him with my hands to go back, and he does. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner, and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man, probably around 6 foot tall, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned in my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I slowly, so slowly, snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I am so thankful he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch, and he needed to be very quiet, and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move, and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here, and I know he had swords somewhere. I don't remember what he was. As I'm looking for a weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." My stomach knotted up. The hair on the back of my neck raised, and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. Fuck, fuck, fuck. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was going on. Hysterical at this point, but still remaining quiet. When the man started banging on our bedroom door, it had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I fucking lost it. I started screaming. I mean, blood screaming. The kind of screaming that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked. He was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder. He was screaming to let him in when it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started fucking laughing. You know, I could just bust this door down in about 2 seconds, right, little girl? Tap, tap, tap. Now he's slyly knocking on the door and asking for me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scrapping at the door. What I had imagined, it was in my 12-year-old head. But he was scrapping the door with his really long fingernails or something. But that wasn't the case. Then I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground, put his hands up. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes, there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there. So being in my hysterical state, I started screaming, sobbing and shaking. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor, holding him this whole time, convinced we were going to die. A female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed, sobbing hysterically. We had been so scared. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew this man. I didn't, but I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror into my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now, doesn't drink, and is now married to a cop. She completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. And he also had some rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust the door down to get us. It still creeps me out, and I have had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. So, creepy, crazed, dragged man and product of my nightmares, let's never, ever meet again. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. The drawing that you see now on screen is available as a print in my shop and also available as a t-shirt to Morty's Media shop. Don't miss the opportunity to grab one of these, cause they will be gone soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in my next video.